Welcome back. The subject today is nullification or state sovereignty, and my guests today are Representative Judy Boyle from District 9 in Idaho, and Allan Hodge, who is both a student of Tom Woods and an avid reader of his books. When the Attorney General's office offered the opinion that they felt that it was unconstitutional, that your bill on state sovereignty was unconstitutional, Tom Woods made a reply to that, and he's the one, of course, that wrote the book, Nullification, and he wrote it to Wayne Hoffman, who's the head of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. He says, I have reviewed the statement of the Idaho Attorney General's office and find it misleading, incomplete, or mistaken on virtually every point. A full reply will be forthcoming, but rest assured that Jefferson's doctrine of state nullification is in no way compromised by the arguments advanced in this statement. Cordially, Thomas E. Woods, and he has a PhD in history from Columbia University, so he knows his stuff. Mm-hmm. One of the things we had talked about off the air was that Allan, you and Judy had talked about the Real ID Act, and that if our AG's office opinion is that it's unconstitutional and they don't support it in principle, we have actually supported nullification in practice because of the Real ID Act. Would you tell us about the Real ID Act?
The Real ID Act is something that Congress passed in '05, I believe, and that would have mandated all of us to have national ID cards. Mm-hmm. And the state said, no, you have no business doing that, it's too costly, and we're not going to comply. So in '08, the Idaho legislature passed an act that said we will not comply with this. It steps over the line, and it steps all over the states. And that was passed by both the House and the Senate unanimously.
And there was no opinion against that?
I don't know if there was an opinion or not, but they ignored it if there was one.
Okay. Well, you know, I remember people saying that's absurd, you know, that we would be required to have an ID. But mm-hmm. You know, when I was in the legislature in the late 80s, this is interesting, there's a bill that came before us that our Social Security number had to be inscribed in any dental work that we had done. Now that was supposed to be for a form of identification. Now this was crazy. I can remember reading this bill in State Affairs thinking, whoa. Well, what was brought up is the things that they did to the Jews during the Holocaust, mm-hmm. where they had tattooed them. The other thing that was brought up is American Native Indians had numbers tattooed in their gums for ID. Which was something that was brought up during all of this. So this is yet just another means of identifying people, and people don't want to feel as though Big Brother's watching their every move and knows where they are every second. So we certainly, as you said, Allan, supported that in practice. So.
Yes. It was just that probably the N word wasn't used in any of the language.
Meaning
the term
nullification.
or interposition. So, but the point is that the idea is that the state of Idaho, and other states too, there were so many other states that followed Idaho's lead or were joined with Idaho in this whole thing, that the federal government just, they couldn't enforce it because there was too many states that wouldn't go along with it. But so, in practice, the states did what their job. They refused to allow an unconstitutional law to operate within their jurisdiction.
Well, and it's interesting, you and I like to watch Judge Napolitano on his, is it Freedom Watch? on Fox Business News, and it's interesting because he talks about nullification and states' rights, and it seems to be on the minds of a lot of people these days because it feels, at least this is the feedback that I'm getting from people, that the federal government wants more power and to have the states kind of reined in. That was never the intention of our founding fathers. What happens should this bill pass, the governor sign it, becomes law, and it's challenged in court, then where do we go?
Well, it's a state law, so we hope it'd be challenged in state court, but they would look at it a little differently than federal court.
Okay. And has anybody even discussed this to the extent that they have any ideas of where the judiciary would stand on this?
We don't know, because we can't ask them and they can't tell us.
Well, and this is problematic, because this goes right back to Jefferson's point, is that the federal government and its various branches ought not to have a monopoly power to determine what is constitutional and what isn't. Because after a while, it ends up interpreting the Constitution in such a way that it will just amass more and more power unto itself. And we can see this happening. I mean, it ought to be obvious now that that is what's going on. And so Jefferson said that, and Madison too, they said that the states are parties to the Constitution, and they have every much of a right to determine what is constitutional as any of the branches of the federal government does, because there is no common judge between the two. And so that means each party can determine for itself.
You know, we talked a bit earlier how it's just unprecedented that both the House and Senate would have these joint meetings early on of both the education and health and welfare, and ask for public input to JFAC. And I know that that never took place when I was in the legislature. So I think it's exciting that this legislature seems to be engaging the citizens more and asking for their participation. Are you finding that people are coming forth more readily and wanting to be involved in the process? Absolutely,
and I think it's the remodeled Capitol that's helped that a lot, because now there's meeting rooms that are big enough for people to get in there. People can access anything that goes on the internet. They really have got access to what goes on.
Well, being on Education Committee this last week, you've seen a lot of people coming forward. Have there been a lot of folks involved?
That room was packed.
Great.
Absolutely packed.
And what's the capacity of that room, do you think?
Oh, I think it's 220. And then there was an overflow room.
Great. Well, I hope that that'll happen on Thursday when nullification or state sovereignty comes before the committees as well, because that's a great time for the public to be involved. One of the things we should say is that when people come forward, sometimes it's a little bit intimidating, and I think that the legislature does a great job, the committee chairman, trying to help people feel a little bit more at ease. You make your remarks to the chair and then to whomever you're talking, and then the representative or senator does the same thing. Keep in mind, folks, that citizens are the employers and the elected officials are the employees. So coming and checking on their work and saying you're concerned about certain things is just absolutely fine and encouraged, right?
Absolutely. That's the way our government works, or should.
Yeah, and thanks to representatives like you, I think people are engaged. We've got a great group of representatives. This will also be on YouTube on fyidaho.com, this program, and on KBGN 1060 AM. We thank you for joining us for Legislative Watch. I'm Elizabeth Allan Hodge.